In this episode of All About the Insight, Lucy Alexander, Director of Analytics and Insights at the Financial Times, shares her journey into the world of insights. She discusses the importance of understanding the voice of the customer, the power of insights in driving business decisions, and the challenges of communicating insights effectively. We also hear some great tips on data visualization and valuable advice for aspiring insights professionals. Enjoy! Hi everybody, and welcome to All About the Insights. Our guest today is Lucy Alexander, Director of Analytics and Insights at the Financial Times. Hello Lucy.
Hi, lovely to be here. Nice to meet you.
Great to have you here. As you know, Lucy, this podcast is all about how and why insights matter. But before that, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are today.
Sure thing. Geographically, my journey started in Cornwall. That's where I'm from, the absolute far southwest end of Cornwall as well. And my parents were recent movers from London, so I had this appetite to go back, much as I
Nice.
loved it there, and I did. But I thought, I could see that London was a place where you went to get a really exciting job. So that's what I did, and went to university, didn't study anything related to what I am currently doing, which I think is kind of an interesting route. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I can see that it does have some advantages in as much as you build up different types of skill. So I studied French at Warwick. I loved that. And then, I landed in London, really still very unsure about what I wanted to do in life. And by accident, ended up in publishing, more or less. Then I dotted around a little bit, but what was really important in that first job in publishing was that I heard and understood that there were these jobs around research and insight, and I had never actually ever encountered anything like that before, and I was thrilled by it. Like, it truly captured my imagination, and I could see immediately how important and powerful it could be. So I then pivoted myself to work in insight roles, and never left, really.
So what was it then that you thought research and insight sounded interesting and fascinating? Can you put your finger on what it was that made you think that?
Yeah, sure. So what immediately was clear to me was that the holders of the insight had this great power, and they were really listened to. And I know that actually isn't always the case in organizations, but I do think that news media has been quite good at that. And the woman that I remember having all of this insight to hand just seemed to me to be so cool. I thought she was brilliant. Firstly, she had this fabulous information. She just seemed to be so knowledgeable about the performance of the company and how it was doing. And she went and told really important people what was going on all the time. And I was just blown away by that. I could see what other people were doing. And for me, that felt like that was a really sort of niche, but important niche to try and get into. And it wasn't then that I really understood the importance of the customer, or like how that related to what this kind of golden spreadsheet did. But it was more that I just suddenly had tapped into what was this sort of hidden world of information that was really, really powerful. And I still find that exciting, even in my current role today.
Definitely. It's a really interesting word, isn't it? Power. In
Mm.
terms of the insights and kind of what are the things that we do want to try and explore. So other than that, kind of power, that fascination, any other drivers or motivations to stay in the insight world?
I think you've got to be the right way minded for a career in insight. Even though I did a French degree, I had done economics, physics, chemistry, and maths in my international baccalaureate. I was really analytical as a person, very into problem solving, had always been curious like that. I think that those types of people really do enjoy insight work because it's solving problems in a quite nice, beautiful environment, often in as much as you've got enough time to think and you've got enough space to think. And I think that those are real sort of they're just you're lucky if you get to work in that kind of way. So that's how I've always seen it, that you're really lucky if you're given time to think and really mull things over and try and think of what are the bigger pictures or the solutions. So that's what's kept me in it, is this delight at this problem solving way of working.
Brilliant, brilliant, yeah, yeah. And again, problem solving, whether it's in terms of consumers doing what we want them to do, not want them to do, whether it's problem solving for businesses, really, really powerful kind of undercurrent there, isn't it? So you're currently at the Financial Times, Director of Analytics and Insights. Tell me a little bit about the kind of insights setup where you currently are.
Yeah, sure. So we're very, very lucky at the Financial Times. There's a mature data and analytics set up there. The team that I work in is quite large, and there are 5 sub teams which go from, if you think of the earlier pipeline, so how our data is organized, how we gather it, and data governance and data in BI, and then right up to kind of data science at the other end. And we sit in the middle somewhere of that. Our primary role is to translate what that raw data and what that raw insight is into business recommendations. And I see my role as the person who brings all of that insight and intelligence together. And then we collectively work to package that in such a way that's really relevant for our stakeholders across the business.
Okay, yeah, and we'll definitely talk around, kind of packaging it and embedding those insights. In terms of the kind of typical questions you get asked, the typical insight challenges that drop into your inbox on a Monday morning, are there any kind of typical common challenges, questions that you get?
One of the things that I think is lovely about the way we work is that there isn't too much which is typical. Actually, we have a tremendous variety. We don't get anything which is kind of a recurring request, or even which is generally speaking similar to what we've been doing before. Our challenges are, whilst keeping the customer right at the heart of what we do, what is the right step forward? And we're often presented with that problem in business language, and there are multiple different solutions, and we try and help people make the right choice. Or it could be a completely new idea that we're having to see if there's an appetite for, or it could be truly understanding the way that our customers engage with our brand. And there's enough variety in there to keep it really interesting and exciting.
Yeah, yeah, variety is the spice of life, as they say. You mentioned the voice of the customer, and I'm interested. It might sound like a daft question, but why is that important? We hear it a lot. It's often spoken around. Why would you say? How would you describe the importance of that voice of the customer to a business, to an organisation?
Well, at the most basic level, you don't have a business without your customer. And I think that it's quite easy when you're involved in the kind of day-to-day running of something and you are very focused on your own remit to lose track completely of who it is ultimately, and that who is consuming your product and what actually they need from you and looking to get from you. And so for us, this whole thing about keeping our customer constantly at the forefront is to go through that. It seems so obvious, and I hear people saying that they're doing it all the time, and I think you're not actually. It's very, very easy to project onto your audience this sort of mirror of yourself, and to think of yourself as being the audience, or the audience being really similar to you, and actually trying to optimize for your own experiences. And a big part of what we do is to try and get you to step out of yourself while you're in the business context and think about somebody else and how they may want the product ultimately to be tailored. And that for me is the kind of imagination leap that you have to take every day, in order to really think about what the right thing is for the brand over the long term. Way beyond your tenure there, your job is to guide it for the customer that's going to be there
Mm.
similarly, into the future.
And in terms of, kind of understanding customers, I don't know, you may do, you may not, how do you keep on top of any trends or kind of patterns that you're seeing in consumers? Is that something that your team does, or do you pull in other data and reports and whatever?
Yeah, we're very interested in all of those things. We're very interested in what's happening in the wider market, obviously. I think there's a difference between the idea of keeping up with trends. To me, sounds very exhausting, for a company like ours, where what you're hoping to do is to be reflecting what's happening in the world, because obviously we're a news organization, right? So you almost like can't avoid being up to date, but at the same time realizing that constant change in what the user is having to interact with, as in the actual product that you're serving them, that's a different thing. So there's this balance of, is the is the content current and interesting? It should always be. But at the same time, you want to have continuity so that the product means the same thing from one day to the next, and you're not constantly buffeted by all of these different kind of changing trends and tides.
So there's I don't want to put words into your mouth, a kind of guiding principle behind, the rationale and the mission of the Financial Times, but being aware that, you might need to tweak it at times and just reflect some of the things that are going on, but not changing wholesale kind of what you do.
Well, it's important for us to understand, for example, the younger generation coming up behind me. I'm a millennial. The generation behind Gen Z, we are talking about completely different ways of consuming content than I'm used to, and certainly than the generations older than me are used to. So there is no way of moving into the future without really engaging with the reality of how people are consuming things, especially news. And what it means in this particular time that we're in, where we have been knocked about a bit by a series of really major news events in sequence, where it has felt at times, a lot to have to consume, especially if you're having to think about COVID or Brexit or, really, really big political changes. And how you balance all of that so that it's not overwhelming, so it's still something that you want to engage with, is another challenge as well.
Mm-hmm. So when you've done all that and you're kind of managing the challenges, how do you know that insights are working? What does that look and feel like in a business?
It's a really good question. And I think in that sense, I would ask you maybe back, like, what do we mean by the insights are working? Um, if
I
your
suppose,
job, oh yeah,
yeah.
no, go on, tell me, because I was gonna, yeah, don't tell me, and then I will tell you
Well,
what I mean.
does the business feel differently, act differently? Do you see different challenges? I say challenges, but different questions arising, different perceptions of the insight team. In terms of the business, how do qualitatively, what does that feel like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, okay, and thank you for phrasing it like that. That's perfect. I think it has a lot of different jobs to do, which is really hard. So within any organization, you have a series of different types of stakeholder. And I see one of the jobs of my team, but actually we have lots of different jobs, and I'll go through a couple of them. But one of the jobs of my team is to influence and guide the people who have the power to make the decisions, because otherwise, what's the point, sort of? So one of the ways that we measure our success is our ability to guide the business in the right way. And that's through lots of different reasons. So one of the things we measure is, has a decision been made off the back of an analysis? If there's no expectation that a decision is going to be made, then we might not do it. It has to lead to an action. Everything must be action orientated. We don't really do things for just knowledge improvement unless there's a clear reason why we ought to be doing that. So that's one thing that I'm very bothered by and try and keep on top of. In terms of how you're perceived, this is a really interesting question. How is the insight perceived? If you're doing a really, really good job, it is possible that people feel uncomfortable by what you're doing in the insight world. If you're simply supporting the actions that have already been taken, and you're a very positive reinforcement for all of the decisions that have been made, in a way, you're not really adding a lot of value. And so one of the most important things for our team is that we're seen as objective,
Mhm.
and that we're not particularly influenced by politics beyond our little, outer edge. So for me, that means that there's always going to be a certain level of discomfort with some of our stronger pieces of analysis, or our clearer guidance, or our recommendations that might not always be absolutely positive and in line with what has been done. And we have to just take that on the chin and see that as a really positive indicator that actually, if people are feeling slight discomfort with some of what you're saying, you're
Mm,
probably doing a good job at staying objective.
mm. It's a brave thing to do, though, isn't it? Challenging back and whatever, is there anything that gives you reassurance or support in that, you've got to go and see uh, your director and it's an uncomfortable message, what do you draw on there to help you deliver that message and say it with confidence?
Well, there's lots of things you should do. I think the first thing, the most important thing, is to make sure that you're correct. Have you done your sums properly? Have you come to a logical conclusion from that? Have you got enough of the context to be able to make that kind of recommendation as well? Because these are all of the first things that are going to be raised if you do say something which is potentially uncomfortable. So number one, like, are you solid in terms of what you're saying? So the rigor has to be there. I'm very lucky that there's a supportive hierarchy. If we do say something and people feel uncomfortable about it, generally speaking, that there's a lot of comfort with that, as long as we're correct. I think there's a lot to be said about how you message these things. The way that you try and explain these things, the work that you do to make your stakeholders understand that you are rooting for them, you're pulling in the same direction as them, but it's our job to try and say things as we see them. And for the most part, we're lucky that is exactly what the culture's like. So it's never come to a point where we've really hit a crisis point
Yeah,
from
no,
releasing something.
I wasn't suggesting you were. I suppose what's interesting as well is, you're an experienced professional. You've director at the Financial Times. Obviously, you'll have a team, and there'll be people who are working their way up in the industry who are starting to have those conversations. Is there any advice, tips, the strategies, tactics that you would suggest to people who are learning the skills that you just described?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of your career, the most important thing you have to do is to build the trust. And that's done in various different ways. I think just being really clear in your communication, being very reliable and consistent in terms of the quality of the work. Those are the most important foundations to lie early on, because ultimately what you are hoping to find is that on that platform you can then build the confidence to do all of these other things which ultimately make you effective as a leader. But yeah, the kind of the trust building and that phase goes on a long time. I think what I have seen work really well, with even the most junior members, there's absolutely no reason why this shouldn't apply to anyone at any level, is to have a strong voice, but it be really, really supportive, and everyone understanding that you're coming from a place of wanting to help. To be available as well is really important, because I think that there is sometimes a perception that it's quite hard to access data, or analytics or insights. So making sure that you're really there, really collaborative, helping with brainstormings at an early stage in things, not being seen as kind of the last person to speak to when something's already been decided. So I think building all of those foundations and just making sure that those relationships are really tight is probably the most effective way that you can get yourself out there as a younger insights professional. There's no limit to it. I mean, I've seen people just starting out be fantastically effective in that way.
Yeah. Well, what do they call it? Not the naivety of youth, but people, kind of happy to go. Let's think around, kind of your experience, whether it's at the Financial Times, elsewhere, in terms of insights. Can you think of any examples, occasions, instances when insights have, very practically led to better business decisions, either kind of stop what we're doing or start doing this, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, too many to count, really. Like, you would hope
Good.
so.
Yeah.
You would hope that there would be lots and lots. I mean, we've talked in public about a few examples of these over the years. One which is years old, but we did it very, very soon after I joined the FT. Actually, possibly slightly before I joined, actually. And it was to do with slowing down the site, and they were able to prove from that like the direct financial implication. And I think what was really interesting about that was the way in which it influenced our ways of working onward. So we were able to see, okay, if you can show a clear value of what you're recommending, then everything else seems to be a lot easier in terms of swaying opinions with decision makers. So we've really heavily used that kind of approach in the future. I mean, we test, for example, all the time. We're always testing, and that's one of the easiest ways to influence decision making, because you've got a clear fork in the road and you've got really clear evidence that the thing that you have done has actually made a difference. And that tends to be a way in which you can very clearly influence decision making. Beyond that, we really try to monitor what is happening at a bigger level. So we try to look at the wider trends that are influencing the company at any one time. We try to be really at the front foot of that, so that by the time we've done the analysis and really looked at something from a kind of research perspective and also from a data perspective, we're in line with where the senior team want to be anyway, and there's a kind of obvious next step that comes from it. So that's how we try and do it. I'm trying to think of some other really kind of great examples of it for you, but they're honestly, it's like a day-to-day thing. You know, we're trying to make decisions all the time that influence. It's really a lot. Another example actually is where, you know, we make sure that when we're publishing articles is when people are consuming them and things like that. And these are the types of things which are really important to try and align and just make sure that you're running as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the word value there, just to pick up on that. Is that pure commercial value? Is it value in other ways? What is value to your director, your stakeholders?
That's a really, really interesting point. I think it's a nuanced thing. So I don't see how it can be as simple as money, because so many things are really impossible for us to measure in that way. But you do have to also think that money is an excellent way of measuring it, because at the end of the day, it's quite a healthy approach for insights teams to get into the habit of doing, is to see themselves as not being a cost center for the company, but as a revenue generating place. And the sort of requirement for that to be a thing is that you work out what kind of value you are contributing. So if you can find a really sensible proxy for money that still kind of translates in that way, I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, a measure for us would be about decisions that we had influenced, outcomes that we had potentially changed. Those are really, really clear ways in which we can attribute some kind of value. I know of other organizations, for example, who have completely different remits, who have used as their kind of guiding principle and sense of value things along the lines of legislation that they've been able to influence, things like
Okay.
that. So, I mean, it happens to work for us that it's quite revenue led in a way, but there's no limit to what you could be doing.
Yeah, yeah. We've spoken a lot around, kind of the value of insights and, all the good work that you're doing. Not everything is always easy in terms of challenges and difficulties. What do you see there in terms of implementing insights and convincing others of the value of insights?
Yeah, it's an ongoing struggle for any company, because you can't move for hearing about people who find it a little bit difficult in getting their insights and analytics to the right audience or getting it given the right attention. The FT has always been quite great on that side. So we've had a big sort of data presence for as long as I've been there, but I'm certainly aware of the challenge of making sure that it's landing correctly with your stakeholders, that they understand that it's really hard what you're doing and that it's worth continually investing in. I think the way that I see it working well is if you have senior sponsorship.
Hmm.
I think you have to have people at the most senior level in your corner. And that would apply to anyone, I think. So it's no different to us. And then I think it works really well if you're also embedded very strongly with the organization, so that you're not just relying on your senior sponsorship where there's like sort of potentially a groundswell of less interest. You've got both ends covered, because truly a lot of the work and the day to day and the influence is at the level of the doers in the company. And then the decision makers have to be on board as well. So for me, it's fundamental that we are on the ground with the teams, but at the same time, we don't forget that the people who are ultimately making the decisions have to be on side with us as well and to see the value of what we're doing. So we try both ways.
Yeah, 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 that makes sense. And you mentioned, kind of attention and landing insights. In terms of your reports, your outputs, your documents, how do you share and embed those within the organization?
Well, we are super fortunate within our data and analytics team to have a knowledge management lead, and part of their remit is really to go that final mile, because actually I think you've hit on a really interesting point, that you can be the best insights team in the world, but getting it out there and evangelizing about it is often the skill that people lack actually in this discipline. it's not at all a given that you can be a brilliant analyst and a fabulous presenter, for example, or that you might have the confidence to go out there and that sort of personality. So we are so lucky that we have this fabulous knowledge management lead who helps us with all of these things, and who really understands the way that communication can really drive far better outcomes for your analysis. Part of what he has already done since he joined is to massively professionalize a lot of our output. So, really making sure that it looks the part, it's really, really consistent in everything that we do. We've got more touch points that we use. We probably use them more than we did. And it's just been an excellent example of how you can kind of consolidate where your knowledge lives as well, so that everyone has access to it. So we've just tried a lot of different stuff, and I think seeing the successes along the way has galvanized people, and I do see people more willing to do presentations, to get out there, to be a bit more seen around the company as a result of some of these successes.
Excellent, yeah. And I know when we've spoken in the past, you kind of mentioned data visualization. Tell me just a little bit around that in terms of, kind of, an idiot's guide. I'm an idiot. Tell me about it.
Okay. Of course you're not. Well, let me start from two angles. We work for a newspaper which produces a lot of charts. That's just by the very nature of the type of work that is done in our newsroom. It's quite chart heavy, and the result of that is that we have this unbelievable data visualization team within editorial who produce fabulous and famous charts. We have people who are very, very well known working in that team, who are very followed, and who are really sort of at the forefront of what does that look like. So that, by kind of osmosis, makes everyone better. And we have been following the kind of guidelines that are set out by people like Alan Smith, so he heads up that team, around what does a good chart look like. And I don't want to do it kind of no justice, but I'll sort of launch into what I think is really important. So the main thing is that whoever is looking at the chart is understanding the point of what you're trying to get across. And that sounds really obvious, but actually often you'll see a chart and you won't know what you're trying to be told. Where are we supposed to be looking? So there's things as basic as, are you picking the right chart for the piece of data that you've got? That's actually not as straightforward as it sounds, and people get it wrong a lot. You see people doing a pie chart, you just think this is insane. So basics there. Make it pretty, please. Things like labeling axes, again, they're forgotten more often than you would like to think. I think that the use of annotations and arrows, please point to the point on this line chart, which is the bit I should be looking at. Is there an explainer for this step change or for this plummet? Is there a little bit of text within the chart that explains what you're trying to see? These are all tiny things, but ultimately the way that you play around with them are the difference between having a slide that means something and having a kind of pointless chart slide that isn't very interesting. Beyond that, though, you can do truly lovely things with data visualizations. It's so mainstream now to know about the stunning things which are people are doing them about their own lives. People now have so much more access to data. It's much more of a personal thing, and we're used to seeing data visualizations be really innovative and creative. And I think whereas they used to not be as much, although there is a heritage of fabulous data visualizations going back 100 years and beyond, but I think that we're far better at using them now. So what I mostly want from the team when it comes to making a presentation really engaging is that there is a mixture. It's not too heavy on any one type of thing. Like, we really would never include a table probably in anything that we do. It's just not the kind of work that we do. But for charts in the right places, they're absolutely so powerful, explaining something complex in a way which is really easy to digest.
Is there anything, and I don't know, is there ever a danger that we get carried away in terms of creativity with charts, and we've seen this, so we'll have a bit of that, and I've seen this in my normal day-to-day life, so we'll have a bit of that. Does that ever happen? And if it does, how do you restrict that and prevent that?
I think if you can come back to, I spent most of my answer telling you like how to label an axis and these are very, very basic concepts. And the reason why I do that is because these are the things which really, truly matter. you can easily get distracted by doing really fun and interesting stuff. It doesn't always lend itself to more, clarity or easier for people to understand. And to me, at least, for what we're trying to do, if we don't have long to present an argument or if we don't have long to convince a stakeholder, I do want them to be able to see the point that we're making. That saying, I think a bit of inventiveness might make something more memorable, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it's about finding that nice balance between doing something which looks like at least you're trying. It's sort of, we're using techniques which are not just the bare minimum from Excel. There's something really truly thought through and looking stunning. But at the end of the day, we're not complicating it so that it's losing its intelligibility. So for me, it would be far better to do something really, really simple that's really clear, than to do something which is trying too hard.
Wise advice, wise advice. That's all been fantastic. Heard lots of interesting things. We kind of look back, looking forward. What do you see happening in the insights industry? How's it going to change? What are the big issues as we go kind of 2, 5, 10 years from now?
Yeah, for the near term, I definitely hear a lot more about the concept of value within the data world, because I think that insights and analytics teams are increasingly thinking of value as a really important thing for them to keep track of, and actually it will help with prioritization, which is often a problem. Too many requests, not enough people, and it also obviously helps with the arguments for what we should be doing more of. So that for sure is not going to go away. In a way, the whole industry has been turned upside down by what's been going on at the more generative AI end of the spectrum, and I think it's changed the focus for some people. Or although I think that is perhaps, we're seeing a little bit of a rebalancing after the initial hype, but nevertheless, it's going to change how we work. So ways of working, I think, are going to be fundamentally altered, and there's going to be a big learning curve for everyone, just in terms of getting to grips with how we incorporate that in all of our lives, let alone how we really use it to push the frontier of what we're doing. So
And
yeah.
in terms of AI, as I say, mentioned earlier, I was at a conference yesterday. There's plenty of talk around AI. How is it? How can we use it best? Where is it overstepping the mark? In terms of what you're currently doing at the FT, how are you deploying AI?
In quite a lot of different ways, actually. I think we think of it as in sort of three tranches. There's where we are the consumer of it, and then where we co-create with somebody else, for something a bit more bespoke, and where we are completely the originator of it. And we view that the journalism is, we've put out statements about how we believe that AI should and should not interact with our journalism. We're absolutely committed to writing our own articles, let me tell you that. That's just sacrosanct. But around the edges, of course, we want to use it for efficiencies and for making our performance far better. So there's lots and lots and lots of ways in which the news industry is currently engaging with AI, and actually any retail, particularly paywalls, is a really interesting area where you can optimize a lot. So we're just sort of moving in all directions, and we're really just grappling with where's the fun
Yeah.
opportunity, where's the great opportunity that aligns totally with what we're trying to achieve, and where there's
Hmm.
no compromises on our kind of core values, really.
Yeah, yeah. I think some things might be a dead end. Some things might lead, as you say, to changes in working. So
Yeah.
you've had a great career working at a great company. As you look back on your career, any kind of key lessons or golden rules for other insight professionals coming through as you look back?
um Yeah, I think one of the things which I'm very happy that I did in my career is to trust my instinct on companies. If it wasn't working, I've always taken the approach I'll move on from that. Even though I got great things from everywhere I worked, if it wasn't quite the right fit, then I was always happy to take the learnings that I'd had and apply them somewhere else. And I think, attitudes towards that sort of thing shift, and ebb and flow. But I think trust your instinct on it, because it's really important that you feel happy in a company. Um, I think, speaking as somebody who entered the workforce as a person whose voice was quite literally and also metaphorically quite, um, sort of high and quiet, and I was shy to put my perspective forward for a long time. Learning to find comfort in your own voice and standing behind your convictions and things is something which takes a lot of time to learn. But when you've got to that point because people start to listen to you more.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, kind of trust your instincts. Is there, this podcast is all about the insights and why it matters. Is there one tip? I don't know. That's the point of the question. One tip to make insight matter more in a business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm so in it now. I can't even contemplate what that means because there's just no reality to me where you wouldn't be trying to use insights. It seems like such a no-brainer. Why would you want to go into a decision with less information? But I think that what is really important is to make sure that the insight is good information, because you can have all the data in the world, if it's not being used correctly, or if you're you're not really thinking about the implications of everything, it can just as easily lead you in the wrong direction. So I think good insight is just the most fabulous weapon on your side to navigate the world, and I mean that in the loveliest way, an asset. It's just the greatest asset. It just gives you a huge head start on any problem. It allows you to mitigate for risk. It allows you to find opportunities for growth, and many other things. It's just knowledge is power. So yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine a world in which this is not obviously the most fundamental part of your business to invest in.
Perfect. I love that idea. What a nice way to end. Knowledge is power. Lucy, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been great to be here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy.